Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Brian Dayton with the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. I see we have a lot of people still joining the webinar right now, so we're going to give just another minute for people to join in. But just wanted to thank you, everybody who's tuning in, and we'll begin here in just a minute.
And while we're waiting for people to tune in, I will say a word of welcome. I'm Steve Roberts with the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Sitting to my right is Brian Dayton, who is our Vice President for Policy and Politics here at the Chamber. And to my left is Caitlin Pitlack-Mora, who is a lawyer who assists the West Virginia Chamber. We are being joined today by people from all over the state, including many local chambers of commerce, some of our largest businesses, some of our newest businesses, some of our nonprofit members, and a host of small businesses and partnerships. So we welcome all of you. We will have an opportunity for questions. We anticipate that there will be questions. We also are just pleased to welcome a large number of people and a broad array of people who find themselves interested in the just completed legislative session at the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. I'm saying these things to give, first of all, to give everybody who has tuned in a word of welcome and to introduce Brian and Caitlin, and to give others a chance to join the call because we see the numbers going up rather rapidly and we know people are still joining the call. We don't want to keep you waiting if you have already joined the call. So we're going to get started. We are recording this call so that it will be available to go back and take a look at. And again, if you have just joined us, we will have an opportunity for questions or comments a little later on. Brian and I are going to address some of the issues that the West Virginia legislature took on in its just completed regular session. The legislature dealt with bills relating to health, education, legal reform, some important tax measures, and of course, some budget issues that we will get to discuss. So we've got a pretty good program, we think, laid out for everybody. And Brian, if you're ready, give me a nod and I'll turn the program over to you. And if you decide you have to take a breath, I'll jump in and talk about a few bills too. So,
well, thank you, everybody. So the session concluded at midnight on Saturday, and the legislature is furiously working a number of bills up until that point, including a few that we'll be talking about today. Let me just begin by, from our perspective, overall, this was a very good legislative session. We got a lot accomplished. We were also able to keep some items off the agenda that we did not believe would be helpful towards our mission of making West Virginia a better place to live, work, and raise a family. So all in all, it was, from our perspective, a good session. Well, I'm going to run through some of the major policy initiatives that the legislature passed. And then also, we do want to hear some questions from you. If you've got questions about particular bills, how the process worked and so forth, we're happy to answer those. So let me just begin on the tax front. So the legislature this year finally passed a very significant tax cut, and that was in House Bill 2526. So the bill contains several components, but the main thing that it contains is a 20.25% personal income tax cut across all brackets. And that goes into effect for this coming fiscal year and is going to affect every West Virginian who earns income in this state. The bill also will provide a rebate if you pay your car tax on time. So I know all of us in this state, in order to get registered, you have to pay your car tax. If you do it on time under this bill, you will be able to go ahead and earn a tax credit back via a rebate for paying your car tax on time. For those smallest businesses, and these were businesses that were identified as having an assessed value of less than $1 million, it contains a tax credit on your personal property taxes. So Small manufacturers, if you have an assessed value under $1 million, that'd be your machinery, equipment, and inventory. It's your computers, your office furniture, and so forth. Anything that would be currently subject to property taxes for the smallest businesses in West Virginia received that. There were a few other provisions of the bill, but those were the main things. And the total cut is in the neighborhood of $750 to $800 million. So this was early in the session. I think there was a lot of speculation whether or not they would reach an agreement. But they did and passed that bill overwhelmingly. Also on the tax front was another very significant bill, and that was Senate Bill 151, which deals with the SALT tax deduction. So if you are a pass-through entity, this bill allows you to be taxed at the entity level. It will save a lot of money on your federal income tax, and it has zero cost to the state of West Virginia. Bob Tweel with Jackson Kelly, Steve Roby, the former chairman of the chamber, were both very instrumental in providing some assistance on this bill. We were able to get on this thing very early on and move it through the process, and we're extraordinarily happy when that bill passed. And it has not yet been sent to the governor, but we're waiting for that.
And I want to also add a shout out to the committee chairs, Finance Committee Chairman in the Senate, Senator Eric Tarr, and in the House Committee Chairman Vernon Kress, and the bill sponsors were Mike Oliverio and Senator Eric Nelson was also very helpful. There were a lot of people pulling on the oars on this one. Brian mentioned some, I mentioned some. We certainly haven't mentioned everybody who deserves to be recognized and thanked, but for partnerships and pass-through entities, this is potentially a very significant piece of legislation. We think it improves the business climate for a lot of people in West Virginia. We are working to have a Zoom or webinar type program with the West Virginia Tax Department so that we can have further conversation about the implementation of Senate Bill 151. But on the whole, we want to point to the very important tax benefits that may be available to many of you who are tuned into this event today as a result of the passage of Senate Bill 151. Brian, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please. That was
you were on a good roll there, so
I'll get it going. Also, you can identify this as tax. You also might identify this a little bit in the legal reform subject, but House Bill 3072, which relates to private trust companies, passed, and this bill extends the rule of perpetuities to 1,000 years. So what we've seen is just an explosion in trust business in South Dakota. So this bill mirrors that. It was actually very under the radar. It was a quiet bill, but it moved throughout the process. We were engaged the entire way through and very happy to see that bill pass. Shifting gears a little bit to the budget and health. We had a massive surplus this year, but there are always things that need to be done to make sure that the state's financial condition will stay in good shape. And one of those was addressing PEIA, the State Public Employees Insurance Agency. And so this year, the legislature passed Senate Bill 268. And this was a really significant piece of legislation. To give you a little bit of a background on it. Currently, because this bill has not yet been implemented, hospitals are reimbursed at 50% of Medicare. And so we saw the financial pressure that was putting on our healthcare system when Wheeling Hospital earlier this year announced that beginning on July 1st, they were going to stop taking PEIA patients. So the legislature came together and passed Senate Bill 268. So what that bill does is it, first of all, changes the reimbursement rate for hospitals from 50% of Medicare to 110% of Medicare. It also requires the PEIA Finance Board to get back to an 80-20 payer mixture. Prior to this session, and this is going to be hard for a lot of people to believe, those on PEIA were paying premiums that were lower than they were in 2014. Now, if you talk to almost anybody else who has health insurance, they're not going to tell you that. But the payer mix was getting out of alignment. So it was always supposed to be an 80-20 payer mix. This bill mandates the PEIA Finance Board to get back to that 80-20 payer mix. And then finally, the other major component of this bill is if somebody, a state employee or public employee, is on PEIA and their spouse has the ability to get insurance at their place of work, then their spouse needs to take that insurance. They still can stay on PEIA, but in that case, the person on PEIA will pay full boat for their spouse to remain on. So those were the major changes to that. Now, in conjunction with that, the legislature made sure that anyone on PEIA did not lose money on this, unless you perhaps were one of the top income earners, since PEIA's premiums are based on income rather than risk. The legislature passed Senate Bill 423, and that provides a $2,300 pay raise to every public school teacher and all members of the state police. Every other state employee also receives that same $2,300 pay raise, but that's done through the budget process. So the whole idea there was to make sure that those premium increases that we're seeing would at minimum be taken care of with the pay raise. And for a lot of employees who were not at the higher income levels for their PEIA premiums would still end up saving more money. And also when you look at the tax cuts that we'd be receiving, they would get money back in their pockets from that. But Senate Bill 423 also passed, which will help alleviate some of the pressure people will be seeing as their PEIA premiums will increase. The legislature, the budget bill I mentioned, House Bill 2024, that is the one constitutionally mandated item the legislature must do every year. They have to pass a budget. They don't have to do anything else. And this year, the budget was actually completed a few days ahead of time. In previous sessions, we can all remember the legislature would probably be in right now working on the budget, but they went ahead and got it done last week so that they did not need to stay in for a special session. Also on the healthcare front, there were a lot of concerns about DHHR and just the overwhelming size of that agency. So this year, and the governor has signed it into law, the legislature passed House Bill 2006, which breaks apart the Department of Health and Human Resources into 3 separate state agencies. So that was another major item they were hoping to accomplish, and they got it done pretty early. Shifting gears just so we can keep it moving and then have time to get to questions. On the education front, there was a lot of action this year. I want to give a special shout out to Senator Amy Nicole Grady from Mason County. She is the chair of the Senate Education Committee, and this year she championed what was called the Third Grade Success Act. That bill initially came out of the Senate as Senate Bill 274. That bill got hung up and it ended up getting amended into House Bill 3035, which did pass. But this is a really impressive piece of legislation that is designed to make sure students are reading and being able to do math at grade level by grade 3. The bill adds a lot of professional development in. It gives more ability to hold a child back if they're not meeting those necessary benchmarks. And it also is going to provide a teacher's aide into every classroom in grades 1 through 3. There currently is a teacher's aide in kindergarten classrooms and in pre-K, but this will add it into grades 1 through 3. So this was a major piece of legislation. It hit a couple hiccups later in the session, but they were able to get it done. We were very thankful. Kind of on a neat note, Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida, brother of the former president of the United States, gave a shout out to West Virginia for passing this bill the other day on Twitter. So it's getting noticed that we took this important step. House Bill 3084, we are very happy to see passed. That bill makes it very clear that state institutions of higher education, so public schools, public universities, and public colleges would be able to run a public charter school. It makes it very clear that the governing board could be an administrative unit of those colleges and universities. So we were very happy to see that bill go through. It expands the charter school options in West Virginia, and it has passed and has completed legislative action. Now, the other item on education that we watched very closely was House Bill 2028. And that bill actually was amended in late last week to include another important bill, which was Senate Bill 262. But House Bill 2028 started out clarifying that Hope Scholarship recipients would be able to play sports at their local high school. This bill has now further been amended in to clarify that private school students who live in a district would be able to participate in an extracurricular activity in the public school where their district is if a similar extracurricular activity is not offered at their private school. And it allows a one-time transfer students for whatever reason, if they need to transfer schools, would not lose their athletic eligibility. So that bill did pass finally late on Saturday evening. It underwent some significant changes in the Senate last week, and the House concurred with those changes and passed it. Moving on to the energy front, a couple really big wins here. Early in the session, Senate Bill 188 was geared up and moved out of the Senate by a very strong vote. What this bill does is it sends a message to those looking to build natural gas power plants that West Virginia is a welcome place to be. And this bill was really needed because we have lost a number of natural gas generating facilities, primarily due to holdups through lawsuits and so forth that were really not valid lawsuits, but it was just enough to cause the clock to run, investors to fall off, and so forth. So to give you an idea, as rich as West Virginia is in natural gas, we have no combined cycle natural gas power plants in this state. Ohio has 13, Pennsylvania has 26. These plants under this bill would not be able to sell directly to West Virginia customers, but they would be able to sell directly to PJM, which is the regional grid. Our view on it was quite simple. These power plants are going to be built. Why not build them here in West Virginia so we get the economic benefit, we get the jobs for construction, and that they can be brought here to West Virginia. So this bill, it speeds up the permitting process for natural gas generation and also directs the Secretary of Economic Development, who, by the way, I see is one of the attendees on this meeting, Mitch Carmichael. It directs his office to identify sites for natural gas generation. This bill, to be honest with you, it was a bit of a fight, but we were able to keep it in good shape. Mary Beth Anderson with Antero Resources, Rebecca McPhail with the West Virginia Manufacturers Association were just absolutely rock stars on this bill. They really took the lead. We helped them out on it, but it was a good bill, and in the end has passed, and we're very happy to see that. Another bill that was more of a fight than we believe it should have been was House Bill 2882, which was a supplemental appropriation to the Department of Economic Development to bring in Form Energy. Form Energy is a battery manufacturer that is locating at the site of the former Weirton steel mill. This is a cutting edge investment that's coming into West Virginia. We believe it will spur a lot of other economic activity off of it in that region where the former Weirton steel mill exists. The bill should not have been controversial, but some people decided to make it that way. However, thanks to the strong efforts of Mitch Carmichael, the governor's office, leadership in the House, leadership in the Senate, local senators and delegates, that bill came through in pretty strong form. We were strong supporters of that bill. And, just a special shout out, especially when it got to the Senate. Ryan Weld from Brooke County really managed that bill through, handled questions beautifully, and in the end, it had received a very strong vote. And so that appropriation made, and we're bringing in more investments in West Virginia, thanks to the good work of the Development Office. On the insurance front, a couple of major bills that passed this year. House Bill 2218 is the Distracted Driving Act. We already had it illegal in West Virginia to text while you were on your phone, but there was a little bit of a loophole in the law that didn't say that you couldn't be checking your weather app while driving or looking at other applications on your phone. So House Bill 2218 cleans that up and to make sure that our roads are safe. There was some really heart-wrenching testimony from a woman who lost her husband to a distracted driver who was checking a weather app instead of paying attention. So this was really the impetus for that bill. But that bill has passed, again, with a very strong margin. And the message is pretty simple. When you're driving, pay attention to the road, stay off your phone. Also on the insurance front was House Bill 3270, and that dealt with deliberate intent. Now, Steve is really our resident expert on all things workers' compensation and deliberate intent. This bill ended up only, what it really did at the end was it provided a cap on non-economic damages, and that cap is the greater of $500,000 or double economic damages. So the bill does nothing with economic damages. So if you are injured, if you have loss of wages, if your medical bills are all economic damages, Non-economic damages are pain and suffering, a loss of enjoyment, things such as that are a little bit harder to put a number on. We have non-economic damage caps in other areas, especially medical malpractice. This bill also applied here. The interesting thing was this bill, as it came out of the House, was essentially an agreed to bill between industry and the trial bar. And that did not stop some shenanigans in the Senate where the bill received a troublesome amendment. But thankfully, that amendment was taken back off on the floor thanks to some good maneuvering by the Senate Judiciary Chairman and others. And that bill has passed, and it's in good shape. We were happy with it. I think that the chief proponents who were seeing this as a really big problem, from what we understand, are very happy with the passage of this bill. Now, that kind of, I'm going to go ahead and, while you're thinking about any questions you may have, those were talking about the items that we do, that we were pushing, good bills that got across the finish line. As Steve knows, a significant portion of our time is also spent on trying to keep troublesome items off the agenda. And that's not something we generally talk about too much. Things pop up, we hear issues starting to percolate, so we go over and work to keep troublesome ideas off the agenda. One issue we do want to highlight was in the sector of broadband. There were two bills in particular, one that crossed over to the Senate, and we were fearful may become the vehicle for the other, which never made it out of the House. But House 2599 would have required a pole mapping for broadband. Basically, the Department of Economic Development to create a map of every telephone pole in the state, its ability to hold lines, what its weight capacity was. The broadband providers were not asking for this bill. The Department of Economic Development was not asking for this bill. There were some people that were pushing it, but by and large, those involved in trying to expand broadband were not thinking this was a good idea. Similar to that was House Bill 3397, which would have required anyone who received a grant, whether it's an economic development authority, a municipality, a county, if they received a grant to expand broadband, that bill would have required, if they ended up letting that infrastructure go to an internet service provider or somebody else, giving that infrastructure up, they would have had to pay that grant back with interest. And that would have really killed the public-private partnerships that are envisioned by so many federal grants and are enabling us to expand broadband. So that is a bill that late in the session we had to engage, and we were able to make sure the bill did hit one committee agenda. It did not hit a second committee agenda, and that was fine with us. But that's just an example of some of the things that we are working on throughout the session. We're working on passing a lot of good bills, but on occasion we have to go in and work to stop some troublesome pieces of legislation. I'm going to stop there if Steve wants to jump in, but we would love if you have any questions about various bills that we didn't cover, about the process and so forth. We're happy to answer those questions for you. You can go ahead and put them into the Q&A box or into the chat box. Either one is fine. I'm checking them right now. So we'd love to take questions if you have any.
While you might be thinking of questions, let me jump in with some, and I'll start with some appreciation and some thank yous. Certainly, Speaker of the House Roger Hanshaw has put together a fantastic leadership team. People like Moore Capito, Vernon Chris, Dr. Ellington, Clay Riley, Matt Rohrbach, Delegate Statler, among others, who just really worked well as a team. And it was a great pleasure to see them work as a team. Amy Summers is part of that group. And we want to express appreciation to all of those people and so many more on the House side. On the Senate side, Senate President Craig Blair continued his very strong leadership in the Senate, surrounded by a good team that has Charles Trump as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Eric Tarr as chairman of Finance, Amy Grady, who Brian mentioned earlier, doing a fantastic job in education. I may have mentioned Ryan Weld a minute ago, but also Brian Weld, Eric Nelson, almost too many friends to name, Tom Takubo, who also just was fantastic to work with. And I'll add to that, if you were at the Capitol, you might have seen Brian or me or others from the Chamber's lobby team talking to people who maybe you don't know that we talk to, but we had, this was a session where we had good relationships with people on all sides of issues. You might have seen us sidebarring with representatives of social workers or representatives of organized labor, or representatives of the various teachers unions as potential examples, or representatives of the trial bar. We want to do our work as much as possible in an open and transparent way. And in doing that work, we tend to make a lot of friends throughout the Capitol and around the state. And we are very happy that we have really friends on all sides of these issues. We do have, and we've got some questions in the queue, but I want to take just a moment to say things have been going very well for the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. We think, for one thing, this is a reflection of the economic growth that is being enjoyed in West Virginia. We have growing membership. If today is the last day to cancel a room for the Women's Leadership Summit, which is being held on March 30th and 31st, and we're expecting a large crowd of almost 350 women, double the number of sponsors from last year. And congratulations to Kathy Thomas and Halen George on the chamber staff, to Andrea Garrett and to Caitlin Pitlack for working together to put that program together. It's a fantastic program. Caitlin Pitlack Mora can remind me that it's not too late to register. People are registering us even through today. So we'd like to have you if you're interested in coming. We are working on the program for the Chamber's upcoming annual meeting in late August. And we have other issues that we intend to work on with the legislature. We certainly are interested. We think West Virginia's corporate net income tax rate needs to get further attention. We have one of the higher corporate net income tax rates in the country, and if our economy continues to make progress, we think there could easily be room to re-examine the corporate net income tax rates. A little personal issue of mine. I say personal because we are beginning to talk about it throughout the chamber. Is we have a current balance in the Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund of $376 million. Those of us who have been around a while would say, "Woo, that's the biggest balance we've ever seen in that fund." We are in the period where more money begins to come in. I wouldn't be shocked if the balance in that fund doesn't go over $400 million, and it might even go to $500 million. And we've historically said that we're well funded at $200 million. So we want to have a compassionate approach to unemployment compensation, but we don't need to have more money. All of the money comes from employers, particularly in a particular tax that small businesses notice. And we want to have an opportunity to talk about and address that issue. We also will continue to work on our B&O tax collection process among the cities. Many of our small business members are vendors within various cities, and we have a very awkward way of collecting that tax in West Virginia. Many of our employers say that they don't object to paying the tax, but that there has to be a better way to account for and remit the tax. We think we can work on that. And we will continue to work for more funds for site development, because we do have opportunities with companies looking at West Virginia now that we have become so competitive on so many fronts. We have name brand companies that are looking at West Virginia. They want to have ready to go sites, because we live in a world that is fast moving and competitive. I've got other things I could say. I'm going to stop because we have a lot of questions in the queue. So we'll start taking those questions that are in the queue.
Sure. So our first question has come in regards House Bill 3042, which was the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of this bill. And the question is, do we believe this opens the door for further action on that topic? I think there's probably no other bill this session that we probably had to pause and dive into more than House Bill 3042 this session. So let me give you a little bit of background. It is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that we have been guarding against in general for a number of years right now. There are currently 24 states now with West Virginia who do have a RFRA law on the books, and another 9 that have it by court decision. And there's a bill that is moving through the North Dakota legislature, which, by the way, their legislative session doesn't end until early May. So thank God we're not in North Dakota. But this bill, we did not oppose the version that came out this year. We looked at it with a number of attorneys. We had a meeting at this table to closely examine the language of this particular bill this year. And it was very closely modeled off of the bill that is currently pending in North Dakota, as I mentioned, and a bill that passed in South Dakota 2 years ago. But this bill lacked the definitions that in the past we feared opened the door for it to be misused and used in a form to discriminate. The attorneys that we've had look at this bill do not believe that this bill can be used in that fashion. It does have one very practical effect, and that would be in an instance of a pandemic like we had a few years ago. For example, houses of worship could not be closed down and other businesses of a comparable risk left open. That is one practical effect of this bill. But no, we do not believe that this bill is going to lead to more action on it. We think this has really, in many ways, addressed the issue and, just solved it and taken it off the table. Again, we were looking at this bill. Could this be misused in a way to discriminate against individuals? We do not believe that it can. And further, during the Senate debate, the night the Senate passed this bill, Ryan Well, the majority whip, who serves as vice chair of the Judiciary Committee and has been a strong opponent of a RFRA bill in the past, made a very compelling argument that his reading of this bill would not overturn local non-discrimination acts that are standing in West Virginia. He mentioned Florida and Texas both have RFRA laws and they have local non-discrimination acts. South Dakota has one and it still has its non-discrimination acts intact. And he gave that analysis of the bill, and then the lead sponsor of the bill on the Senate side, when she closed, reiterated his comments that it could not be used to overturn local non-discrimination acts. So in the end, that is why the chamber did not oppose House Bill 3042. And well, we are optimistic that this has taken that issue off the table going forward. Our next question is one that we did get some headlines on late last week, and that dealt with House Bill 3018, which deals with marriage under the age of 18. So this is not a typical chamber issue, but obviously one that we were watching with great interest. So House Bill 3018 came across from the House of Delegates with a pretty strong vote in the high 80s. The chief sponsor was Delegate Kayla Young from Kanawha County. But as the bill came across, it would have banned any marriages from taking place under the age of 18. The bill came up in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then, to much surprise, died in committee on an 8-9 vote. Chairman Trump, Vice Chairman Weld, Majority Leader Tom Takubo, Chandler Swope, Vince Deeds, Mike Caputo, Mike Wolfel were all people who wanted that bill to advance to the floor. But there's a group of senators who formed together on a number of issues, and this one as well, and blocked it. The next day in the Senate Judiciary...
Several from Kanawha County.
That is correct. Several from Kanawha County. And that list is pretty widely available if you search right now of how individuals voted in committee. The following day, Chairman Trump did a pretty remarkable thing, and he moved to discharge his own committee of that bill. And that discharge motion was approved by leadership, voted for that discharge motion, and brought it back to the full Senate. And so at the end, an amendment was reached. I think the proponents were overall happy that it's definitely a step in the right direction. The bill, what it does is it bans marriages under the age of 16. Current law allows it under the age of 16 if a judge gives permission, and over the age of 16 with parental consent. This bill leaves the parental consent component in place, but limits the age gap that someone age 16 could not marry someone more than 4 years older than them. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's actually a pretty interesting statistic. And before this bill really got moving, I wasn't aware that this was such an issue in West Virginia. And it is, and it's an issue not just here, but in other states as well. But the real credit to that goes to Senate Judiciary Chairman Charles Trump. He's the one who got up, that he is not someone who ever wants to discharge his own committee. He felt strongly about it. He's the one who crafted that amendment together and worked it through. So really, I would say hats off to Charles Trump, and he did some good work on getting that bill out of there. Another question we have that came up is what happened with Senate Bill 588 and 592. Trust me, I know about those. Those are our bills dealing with child care tax credits. So last year, we passed Senate Bill 656, which gives a tax credit to businesses who start a child care facility. And the way that tax credit works is it's 50% of your costs of starting the facility on basically everything but land acquisition. So you have to build a building, you have to renovate it, you have to buy furniture, your first year operation costs, all of that goes into that credit. And so that bill was passed last year, which gives that 50% credit. This year, we had two different bills. Senate Bill 588 changed it from a 50% credit to a 100% credit. And Senate Bill 592 basically would have allowed a different type of tax credit for those with existing child care facilities, where they could take a 100% credit on the operations costs year after year of operating a daycare facility. We do not have enough daycare in West Virginia. It is one of the major issues with workforce development and getting more people into the workforce. So our solution has been to encourage employers to create daycare facilities. It's personal to me. I know my wife and I have looked at the costs and we made the decision. She's a highly qualified respiratory therapist in a global pandemic and has chosen financially to stay home and take care of the kids. It is a real problem. So what we're trying to do is encourage that private sector investment. Unfortunately, the bill did hit an agenda in the House. I believe it was 34-3, I believe was the number, but there's so many numbers running through my head. And it was in the Finance Committee. It passed the Economic Development Committee. It was in the Finance Committee, but they had a long agenda, and it was the last meeting before crossover, and unfortunately, we ran out of time. So we're going to come back and push really hard on those bills early next year and try to get them going.
We didn't really sense opposition to those bills. This was just as much as anything a calendar issue, and it admittedly a snafu, but those things do happen. Yeah. And fortunately, we get to come back and work on it again.
I am able to smile a little bit more about it than I was after sitting in finance for 3 hours on a Saturday.
It was a tough day for Brian. So, he really worked the bill, and unfortunately, it got on the wrong place on the agenda and didn't get out of it. Another question is any progress on funding site readiness? There was a major piece of legislation last year that dealt with that. But I think the answer here is there's probably no amount of money that we could say is enough for funding site readiness. It's one of the major issues we hear, especially from the local economic development authorities. We hear it from the State Department of Economic Development. So we continue to be advocates for getting more money for site readiness. It is critically important as we bring more businesses into West Virginia, because what they're looking for, what businesses are looking for is, hey, where's the place I can locate? What's the access of getting those goods to market? Is the site ready to go? So all of those things are critically important. And we continue to advocate for that, and will continue as we prepare for next year's session. And then I'm just reading really quickly right here. We have a long question. Apologize for a second. We have a bit of a long question. So we have a comment about Senate Bill 151, which points to the fact that it passed late in the session and some taxpayers have already begun filing. And what I would say is that the Chamber has already issued a paper on this topic. We certainly can reissue it. It can be found within our website, but we'll do everything we can to make that paper easy to access for you. And it does suggest that people might want to take a little more time on their return, because there are some implementation issues that have to be worked out by the tax department. And our comments on this would be, this is simply the way the legislative process works. There are 134 legislators, which means there are 134 rather strong opinions about things, and it can take time and effort to get all the questions answered. And then when the questions are answered, all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed, and legislation teed up and ready to go. West Virginia will joins about 30 states that have enacted something similar to this state and local tax issue. We're glad we got it. There was no guarantee that we were going to get it. We're glad we got it, but we did have to work at it. That one certainly had a degree of sweat equity that went along with it. Some of you have heard me say, gosh, it would be so wonderful if we could require pre-filing of bills so that we could get, and that's really our way of saying what we really need is a head start. And in some states, and in fact, in many states, they do require pre-filing of bills, particularly bills that have an impact on things like the taxpayers and that have deadlines associated with them and so forth. We don't have that rule in West Virginia. And so we work with the process as we play the hand we're dealt. And we appreciate the concern and the frustration over the lateness of passing the bill. But our point of view is we're darn glad the bill passed. And it is complicated enough that it required some lengthy explanation to some people who really didn't understand this concept. So it really did require sweat equity, and it got a lot of sweat equity. What I might say at this time is that the Chamber works on issues and develops issue papers. We have a very fine issue paper related to the Public Employees Insurance Program that is available to our members. We have a paper we have several papers that we are proud of and that have been heavily vetted related to education issues, some relating to cost, some relating to outcomes, and some relating to proposed changes in the law to help improve the opportunity that our West Virginia children have for learning. Sitting to my left, Caitlin Pitlack-Mora is developing and has developed a very good paper on the supplemental nutritional program that helps 170 families in West Virginia. So if you're looking for a backgrounder on what that program is and why it's important to those 170,000 families who receive SNAP benefits, that is available from the Chamber. And don't forget, as I said at the top, we've got a very good explanation of Senate Bill 151 and some ideas about how to navigate that circumstance related to the state and local tax issue. Brian, do we have more questions? We might. We're going to take a quick look here.
We do have one more question regarding House Bill 2626, which was the Katherine Johnson and Dorothy Bond Fair Pay Act, and what the status of that bill was. That bill this year was introduced early on, but did not make it out of committee. So it did not make it through the process this year. And another question just popped in. Can you share a link for the white paper on Senate Bill 151? The answer is yes. We're going to be sending that member-wide, so just be watching your inbox, and it'll come in there. It's I believe we've already sent a message out on that, but
we'll find another way to highlight it or get it to you so that you've got it kind of front and center.
Yes. And if I could just add on to what Steve was saying with Senate Bill 151, we're certainly working to go ahead and get that explanation out as fast as possible. But our experience this year with the tax department was actually pretty positive. I mean, they were very agreeable. We met in a stakeholder meeting early on to really kind of highlight how this language should be and how this should operate. And they were very, very good to work with on that. And I think as a result, we had a very good bill pass. Now, it does take longer than you'd like. Unfortunately, you have a bill that passes one chamber early on, and the other chamber doesn't frequently want to take it up until day 51 because they want their own bills out. So that can be a frustrating point, but it did pass.
Another point we might make while we have a good audience here is that we are always interested in your needs, your thoughts. We base our legislative agenda on member input. We have a we have a whole program for listening to members, asking for member input. When we get member input, that's when we really know that we're working on the right issues. It was member input that caused us to begin work on the rule of perpetuity related to trusts, and West Virginia is now among the more competitive states in the nation for attracting trust business as a result of the passage of this bill. It's member input that caused us to work on Senate Bill 151, the SALT tax issue. Many years ago, eons ago, it seems that the number one issue was workers' comp and the cost associated with workers' comp. But because very significant changes were made in our workers' comp system, those issues seldom come up from employers. So I think we're making progress. We really look forward to working with a number of stakeholders, higher education, local chambers of commerce, small businesses, businesses of all kind, and the education infrastructure, K-12 education infrastructure, to work on talent pipeline issues. We're turning our attention to how we can best manage the talent needs of employers in West Virginia. A current estimate from Workforce West Virginia is that we have almost 60,000 job openings in West Virginia. And so we've clearly got a mismatch. We've got considerably fewer people than 60,000 actually looking for employment. The estimated number is about 30,000 people actively seeking a job. And we are really looking forward to finding ways to help match the needs of employers with the employees who are available. So that's on the agenda. And again, we solicit your input and advice and welcome your questions.
Thank you. And just one last point, not to go back to 151, but I just got a text from Steve Roby, who said that the state tax department has indicated they will accept amended returns for that if you've already filed your taxes. So just a note there, and I think that's probably the last point we'll go back. And then I see Caitlin has just shared the white paper into the chat box for Senate Bill 151. So before the call ends, if you want to click open that and open that link, that way you have that.
And, I'll just, I'm not sure which of us is going to get the last word here. I'm looking sideways to my colleagues to offer them the last word. But I will say there's always been a tendency to criticize the process. It's not always the most graceful process. And it's not the most graceful process, partly because that's how democracy works. And people get to come to the Capitol and they get to express their opinion. And those who are angry go away angry. And those who feel that they got what they wanted go away happy. And on the whole, our goal is to work with those who are in charge to get done as much as we possibly can get done to for the benefit of all West Virginians. And all West Virginians benefit when we have a good economy and we have lots of jobs available and thereby a tax base that supports good health and good education and good infrastructure. And so our program is built around developing a vigorous economy that will and can and does support good health, good education, good infrastructure, and diversity. And we are very quick to say we take no step back when we spot something that we think could be interpreted as being discriminatory. And we have stood on the front lines and fought on similar issues in the past, and we would continue to do that. And we make the best decisions we can. We've had a couple of other comments, and they are certainly very welcome comments. So I don't really want to have the last word. And Caitlin here spoke very well at a House hearing on deliberate intent. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the very fine staff of the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Brian put in lots of hours. As you can tell from the overview that he just gave, he He knows these issues. He knows the bill numbers. He knows what is in these bills. And he and his team are just fantastic at the Capitol. And I think we can all be proud of the great work that they have done. So, Brian, thank you. Caitlin and other members of the lobby team, thank you so much. And to our colleagues in both the lobby community, the business community, the nonprofit community, we're building a better West Virginia. We are building a better West Virginia. Governor Underwood used to say, we just need to go farther, faster. I think that still holds true. We'd like to go farther, faster, but a united, strong business voice helps us get there. And thank you to all of you for helping make sure that we have that. Our colleagues, by the way, have been fantastic to work with, probably too many to name, but the level of comedy among the business community groups, and those who are not always aligned with the business community has been very good in the session that is now complete. So thank you everyone for your attention. And Brian, do you want to say anything?
No, just thank you everybody for tuning in. And if you think of questions later on, I'm pretty accessible. Just feel free to shoot me an email, call or text, and happy to talk through it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.